Welcome to Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney, who currently represents a majority of our readers in the 18th District after he was first elected in 2012. After redistricting in New York State, he is now running to represent 100% of our readers, excuse me, in New York's 17th Congressional District. Excuse me. Some of this I got from your bio, directly from your bio. Some of this I got from Wikipedia. So if I'm incorrect with any of this, just let me know. Congressman Maloney was raised in New Hampshire and earned his bachelor's and JD from the University of Virginia. Maloney served as a senior advisor in the Clinton administration. After leaving the White House, Maloney built a high-tech startup in New York and later worked for New York Governors Spitzer and Patterson. He is currently the chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Maloney and his husband, Randy, have 3 children together and currently reside in Cold Spring. Welcome, Congressman.
Good to be with you.
I want to ask you a series of questions. Excuse me. That I also asked your opponent, and I think are on the minds of your constituents in the Hudson Valley. I guess the first is, what have you done and what will you do if reelected to combat the increasing crime problem in New York State, obviously from a federal standpoint?
Right. Well, let's look at my record. So what I have done is bring millions of dollars to support good law enforcement and community policing in the Hudson Valley. Rising crime is something we must address, but of course, we should also remember that crime is lower now than it was just 4 years ago. So we don't need to be hysterical about it or go back to an era of mass incarceration or use race as a reason to scare people into action. We need to be thoughtful and effective. So what do I support? I support equipping cops with more resources, more training, better technology, particularly body cameras, shot spotter technology, the kinds of things that support good, accountable policing that are effective at solving crimes. I brought $7 million to local police departments in the time I've been in Congress. And we just passed the the Invest to Protect Act in Washington, which would fund police departments under 125 officers, the biggest police funding initiative since the COPS grants were created in the 90s. So the trick here is to have good, effective policing. And let's not forget the rescue plan, which provided $300 billion to state and local governments. That's what kept our cops and first responders on the job. I also opposed the effort to do cashless bail without a dangerousness standard in it. So remember, the reform was to make sure that poor people and rich people were treated the same way under our bail system. That's the good part of reform. But of course, you can't let dangerous people out of jail. And so we've got to make sure that we've got the tools to keep dangerous people off our streets. That's what I support.
You list among your top priorities as battling the heroin and opioid epidemics. What have you done and what do you plan to do to address this problem, including the fact that fentanyl is being trafficked over our porous border?
Well, with respect to the trafficking at the border, you've got to surge resources to the legal points of entry where the fentanyl is being smuggled through. And don't forget the Coast Guard in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific. That's critical. What does that mean? That means more inspection stations, better screening technology, more personnel, particularly of vehicles that typically bear large commercial shipments of illegal materials. More broadly, what you need to do is you need to have law enforcement be able to divert long-term drug addicts directly to treatment. You need to support behavioral health, particularly at the county level. That's the funding at the federal level that's so important. That means people can get treatment. They have a bed available that can be reimbursed by the Medicaid program and other means. And we have to do a better job at emergency intervention, Narcan for people who are experiencing overdoses. And all of these things together can get at this problem. We also have to be tougher on the countries like China that are exporting this for profit. So you need a whole of government strategy to get at this problem.
Hudson Valley residents are feeling pain at the pump and at grocery stores. What have you done and what do you plan to do to help solve our inflation problem?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a family where, if the gas price went up, the food budget went down. So by this time of the week, we'd be eating Chef Boyardee if that budget wasn't going to change, right? So that's what families have to do. Here's what we should do. We're capping seniors out-of-pocket costs in the Medicare program. That's a big deal. So now only $2,000 a year will come out of pocket, rain or shine. That allows seniors to budget. We're also negotiating, finally, in the Medicare program with the big prescription drug companies to lower the costs of everybody's prescription drugs. That's long overdue. In addition to that, we've released 90 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's what's taken about $1.30 off the price of a gallon of gas. That's a big help. Got to do more to keep that price from going back up, keep it coming down. And there's other things we can do. We can absolutely bring health insurance premiums down for those in the Affordable Care Act. We've done that. We can pay for these things, by the way, with a tax on big corporations, so they'll finally pay what they owe. Finally did that. And there's other things we can do. We can surge the production of energy, particularly renewable energy, so that there's more supply. That brings prices down. That's part of the strategy of the Inflation Reduction Act. And all of these strategies together with going after price gouging, by the way, because these big oil companies are making a fortune off of Putin's war and the rest. We've got to make sure people aren't profiting off the war. All of these strategies together can help bring prices down.
What is your position on President Biden's $10,000 student loan forgiveness executive order?
Yeah, look, I think it was a compromise, and he got it about right. He promised that there'd be student debt relief. It's changing the lives of 40 million Americans. Let's remember, this was part of the pandemic response and promised to help people get through that. It's not just like, for anybody. It's really importantly targeted so that 90% of the benefits go to people making under $70,000, $75,000 a year, largely everybody with a Pell Grant. So he promised to do it. I think it's important that he keep his promise. It'll help millions of young people and middle-aged people got to move beyond that. Don't forget about parents who sometimes are on these loans too. So it's not perfect. My mom and dad sacrificed and saved to send 5 of us to college. They never got any help. And I understand there's concerns about fairness here. But the fact is that it's going to help millions of people. And I think it's a good thing.
Since the Dobbs decision, the topic of abortion is definitely on the minds of many Americans in District 17. I've spoken with Assemblyman Lawler about his position, as I know there is disagreement in the Republican caucus on whether Congress should legislate abortion restrictions or leave it entirely up to the states. So I ask you a similar question. Does Congress have a role on abortion rights? And if it does, at what point in the gestational age of a fetus, if any, should abortion be restricted?
Well, Congress has a role because the MAGA majority on the Supreme Court ripped away 50 years of reproductive freedom. So there is no constitutional guarantee of reproductive health care anymore. And that's why we now have seen 13 states ban it. We're going to 26 states. Something like 30 million Americans now have to hope some politician will give them the opportunity to make their own and sometimes very difficult healthcare decisions. And the fact is we now see 75% of the Republicans in Congress support a national ban. My opponent said that's common sense. He says he doesn't support a national ban, but of course, he said it was common sense, 15-week ban. And of course, he's fine if every state in the country bans it one state at a time, like we're seeing happen. So here's the bottom line. You got a very clear choice in this race. I'm going to support Roe v. Wade. In New York, you've got 24 weeks as the standard. And after that, it's only under extraordinary circumstances, particularly life of the mother, viability of the fetus. But the bottom line is whether you think, whatever you think about abortion, this is the question about who makes this difficult decision. I think this decision should be with women, their doctors. It should be a healthcare decision, not some politician making that decision. Mike Lawler will do nothing as they ban abortion nationwide. He's glad Roe v. Wade was overturned. I support Roe v. Wade.
And so if Congress does legislate about it, would you support the New York standard of 24 weeks?
What Congress has done is pass the Women's Health Protection Act, which enshrines into federal law Roe v. Wade. Let's remember, Roe v. Wade was always a balance, right? It was a balance between no restrictions in the first trimester, early in the pregnancy, and then reasonable restrictions during the second trimester, and a very high bar, typically life of the mother, viability of the fetus, later in pregnancy in the third trimester. That's the common sense of it. But really, the point is not to have politicians set some arbitrary deadline. It's to keep maximum flexibility and discretion between women and their doctors. So yes, I think the New York standard's pretty good. And I think that we should stop letting politicians try to decide. I mean, my God, we saw a 10-year-old girl have to travel across state lines to get reproductive health care after a rape. That is unconscionable. And that's what happens when you have these stupid politicians trying to draw lines around people's healthcare decisions that they got no business making. I support the way it was. Go back to Roe v. Wade.
You and I met in Washington, D.C. when you graciously gave me a tour of the Capitol building with Temple Beth Shalom's former Rabbi Eitan Hammerman.
Great guy.
He delivered the opening prayer in the House of Representatives that day.
Right.
What have you done and what do you plan to do in Congress to fight anti-Semitism and on a related level, work to ensure the safety of our ally Israel?
Well, I'm a strong supporter of Israel, like period, full stop. And I just beat the crowd that supported BDS in a primary. So I'm not just talking about it. I got the scars to prove it. I think Israel's our strongest ally in the Middle East, shares our values. We need to stand with Israel. And I have a record of doing that. I do think anti-Semitism is a terrible problem, and it's on the fringes of both political parties in America. I don't like the extreme left, talking about BDS, and I sure don't like the extreme right marching in Charlottesville saying Jews will not replace us. I was there on January 6th when people wearing 6 million not enough shirts were storming through the Capitol. And I'll tell you right here in the Hudson Valley, my opponent, Mike Lawler, was part of the gang in Rockland County that in the countywide elections in 2019 literally made a video about that stirred up anti-Semitism. The tagline was, "If they win, you lose." And that kind of view of the world, us versus them, is the same thing that's propelling him to put out these mailers that show only Black people committing crimes. There is a movement in America right now, the MAGA movement, that wants us to think it's us versus them, that somebody's got to lose if you're going to win. I reject that completely. And Jews and people of color and the LGBT community are going to be the first ones on the firing line when it becomes an us versus them kind of conversation. So my family doesn't fit. I mean, my family doesn't fit in a future where we can't all go forward together. That is the single biggest difference in this race. It's a difference between my vision of America and the MAGA movement, and that's what's at stake on this ballot.
Has your role as chair of the DCCC conflicted with this, as there are, I guess, some members, and you mentioned, you just mentioned this in your answer about the extremes on both parties, some members of the Democrat caucus who are supportive of the BDS movement?
Yeah, right. The DCCC doesn't support anybody who supports BDS, period, full stop. I don't control who's in the Democratic caucus. That's up to the voters. And there's always going to be people in both parties that say things or do things that most of us disagree with. But here's the bottom line. At the DCCC, we support our frontline candidates. And not one of those candidates isn't good on Israel. And that's the bottom line. And any effort to try to suggest that fringe voices in the Democratic Party represent the rest of us is just an effort to play off the kind of fears and stereotypes and caricatures that I just described.
Should Congress continue to fund the war in Ukraine? Should NATO get involved? And most importantly, how do we prevent Russia from detonating a nuclear weapon, which is definitely on people's minds?
Well, I serve on the House Intelligence Committee. I was in the region and at NATO headquarters when the war began. I was in Munich with President Zelensky just a few days before the war started. What I can tell you is the release of classified information by the United States government helped rally the world, and we stayed one step ahead of Putin before the invasion. It is a miracle that the Ukrainians have been able to push back on the Russian army, and a miracle that has happened because United States taxpayers and the United States government supported that effort with billions of dollars. We're up to about $60 billion before we're done already supporting both the Ukrainian economy and the Ukrainian war effort. I think it's absolutely essential. I think Putin is a dictator and a thug, and if he is allowed to occupy Ukraine, then NATO itself will be on the chopping block. The Baltic nations will be next. No, we have to draw a line here, but we shouldn't do it alone. That's why rallying the NATO alliance and our allies in Europe and indeed around the world has been essential, and their contributions have been significant. We're paying a price for it. That's one of the reasons gas prices are up. It's one of the reasons the Europeans are going to face a difficult winter and are facing economic headwinds. But freedom is worth it. Freedom's not free, and we should support the effort in Ukraine.
Should Congress continue the January 6th committee?
Well, I think you see them wrapping up their work, and I think they've done very important work in terms of documenting in a bipartisan way what happened on January 6th and who was behind it. That's essential so that it never happens again, and so there's accountability. Because 140 cops were in a 4-hour fistfight with a bunch of lunatics, and a bunch of people want to tell you it was no big deal, when the whole point was to stop the peaceful transfer of power and undermine a presidential election. That's a breathtaking reality that has been systematically, painstakingly documented by the Jan 6 committee. So I'm very glad that work has been done. I look forward to their report, but I do believe they're wrapping up the work in the next couple of months.
The two parties seem equally critical of big tech, but from different standpoints. Does Congress have a role in regulating big tech, and where do we draw the line between preventing hate speech while protecting Americans from censorship?
Right. I mean, of course, Congress has a line here, and Congress has, of course, already inserted itself in this. And I think the single biggest problem we've had is the pernicious effect of social media on our democratic discourse, on the role of malign foreign influence, and this is a big one: the effect it's having on our kids and on their psychological health, particularly during the pandemic and since. So I think there are real external costs, is the way economists would say it, with the way the social media has impacted our country. And some of those costs need to be internalized so that the companies themselves have to deal with it. So it is a better system if the private companies have to worry about liability than if they can just willy-nilly put malign influence out there that undermines our democracy. They should worry about whether this stuff on their platform is demonstrably false or not. And whether it's posted or not, they shouldn't allow it to go viral. And they should have some exposure if they are negligent in allowing that kind of damage to occur. Likewise, I think it is very important that we do better education for our kids around what social media means and the effect it has on them psychologically. We're seeing some really troubling data on the rise of depression and suicidal ideation and things that are really affecting kids at younger ages. And we know it's linked to social media. Here's the bottom line. We have to have a partnership with the private sector on this. We want to lead the world in these technologies and these industries, but we cannot ignore the costs on our politics or on our families.
And I guess you seem to be referring to Section 230, I believe it's called, of the
Exactly right.
FCC. Is that something that you support overturning?
I think it needs to be looked at very carefully. And what I support is increasing the liability concerns of these companies so they engage in better conduct. I want the lawyer at Facebook or Twitter to speak up in a meeting and say, if we let this one go viral when we know it's false and people are going to die because it's a deep fake video about ethnic violence in some part of the world, or it's Russian disinformation and it's demonstrably false, I want that company to engage in better conduct because their business model right now depends on letting crap spread around in a viral way, and they make more money when it does. That is the fundamental problem here, and you have to change those incentives. So yes, Section 230 is part of that. How you do it really matters.
Just on a personal standpoint, I guess, what caucuses are you currently a part of and why? And do you plan to join any new caucuses if reelected? And I saw, I guess you're part of No Labels, I believe, and there's some other caucuses you're involved with.
Yeah, look, right now, I mean, I'm a member of House leadership, so I sit at the small leadership table, and that's where I'm able to make the biggest impact. That's how I was able to get a $12 billion bill to rebuild all the bridges in the Hudson Valley. That's how I was able to ban oil barge anchorages on the Hudson River. My opponent was a lobbyist for the oil and gas companies while I was banning oil barge anchorages on the Hudson River. So my impact on the House has been, on policy has been increased as my role and leadership has increased. But of course, I'm a member of the New Democrats. I believe the private sector has an important role to play in our economy. And I think we need to be intelligent as Democrats about how we partner with the private sector and not just demonize everybody out there running a business. I think we can have a good, strong, sustainable private sector that creates wealth. We just want it to be sustainable and fair. That's what the New Democrats often focus on. I'm part of the LGBT Equality Caucus, something I care a lot about. I'm the first openly gay member of Congress elected from New York. I'm the most senior ranking LGBT person ever to serve in the House of Representatives. We got a long way to go. It's still okay to fire LGBT people in dozens of states in this country. That's crazy. And my opponent in this MAGA movement are trying to take us backwards, because when they overturned Roe v. Wade, by the way, they took out the privacy rights in the Constitution on which marriage equality and everything else depend. So we've got a real work to do there. So those are some of the key caucuses I work in.
Who do you plan to support for Speaker of the House, and do you have a future leadership ambitions yourself?
Well, as I just said, I'm a member of leadership now.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what happens. I think it's too soon to be talking about that. We've got an election in 3 weeks. That's 100% of my focus. I've got to go back and earn my own seat. This seat's competitive. It always has been. That's fine. The voters get a choice. So I'm going to win my seat the old-fashioned way. I'm trying to beat back this MAGA movement because I think it's going to take our country in the wrong direction. And we'll deal with leadership the day after the election.
Congressman, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, thank you very much. I'm asking for people's support. It's been the honor of my life to serve in the Congress. I've passed 45 bills into law, helped 10, 12,000 people out of my district office one at a time, brought billions of dollars of funding back to the Hudson Valley. I want to keep doing this work.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Take care.